Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We just finished Act One of Macbeth, and boy, we couldn't have anticipated much better. Now, Act One of Macbeth is very key, has a couple of very key fundamental elements to it. And in this video, what I'm going to do is break down all of those elements. Now, we start off in Act One, Scene One, with witches chanting in a storm and outlining this plan that we end up later seeing them again in Act One, Scene Three. Now, why does Shakespeare start off with witches? Well, for starters, he begins with the witches by trying to engage his audience. Witches at the time, especially in the 17th century, were very feared. They contradicted everything that the Roman Catholic Church was focused on. They focused on the devil, right, as opposed to God. So witches were very feared at the time. Now, by starting off Act One, Scene One with witches, my goodness, Shakespeare has a completely engaged audience. The witches use what's called a paradox, which is a literary term that I talk about in our literary PowerPoint. A paradox is a statement that contradicts each other or has opposite meaning. But when we investigate it or look at it, it makes sense. What I mean by this, in Act 1, Scene 1, the witches say, fair is foul and foul is fair. Two contradicting meanings, but ultimately it makes sense in how the witches plan on playing with Macbeth. Now, in Act 1, Scene 2, we end up figuring out that Scotland has been faced with the double invasion by both Ireland and Norway. Macbeth and Banquo have just fought off Irish invaders, plus an internal traitor called MacDonald, who was the Thane of Glamis, has now turned on Scotland and was joining the revolution and fighting against Scotland. Now, keep in mind, this is kind of like imagine the mayor of Toronto supporting America on an invasion of Canada. Finally, Macbeth and Banquo, particularly Macbeth, fight off these invaders and they end up catching MacDonald and win the war. Now, we see this, and my goodness, here is Macbeth, this noble human being. And King Duncan in Act 1, Scene 3 is quick to praise him as he figures out that Macbeth almost single-handedly fought off all of these invaders. Now, as Macbeth and Banquo are walking back from a war, they're walking through this forest, and they come across these three witches, okay? Now, the witches hail Macbeth as Thane of Glamis, which he already is, but they also identify him as the Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth doesn't know this yet. Duncan hasn't told him that he's going to be the Thane of Cawdor. So he's a little bit caught off guard at the time of this. The witches also say that Macbeth will one day be king. OMG. Banquo, meanwhile, he finds out that his children will be heir to the throne, that his children will be king down the line. Now, we can see how this creates a little bit of conflict here. One, Macbeth doesn't even know that he's going to be Thane of Cawdor. We know that because we've already seen what happened in Act 1, Scene 2. But additionally, Macbeth's kind of caught off guard by this entire situation. In addition, let's say Macbeth becomes king. How on earth does Banquo's children become king? You can see how the conflict is building. This creates suspense. Shakespeare intentionally does this so that it engages his audience at wondering, hey, how is this whole thing going to unfold? Now, in Act 1, Scene 4, we end up seeing Macbeth and King Duncan, and King Duncan outlines that he plans on going to Macbeth's house to formally make an announcement that Macbeth will be Thane of Cawdor. Now, he plans on staying the entire night, which was not uncommon at the time, and wants to stay at Macbeth's castle. He also tells him of his plan of naming Malcolm the future heir to his throne. Now, we can see how this contradicts what the witches said. Macbeth at this time did not realize that he was going to be named Thane of Cawdor, didn't even know that MacDonald had turned against Scotland, but figures this all out and realizes, oh my goodness, the witches were onto something. Now, Lady Macbeth receives a letter from Macbeth indicating that he's going to be Thane of Cawdor, and as well outlining what the witches' prophecies are. Now, we see Lady Macbeth enthralled with this idea in various soliloquies. And what a soliloquy is when a character is alone. Okay, doesn't realize that there's any other characters in this scene. They believe that they're talking to themselves. And why a soliloquy is very important is it allows for us to see what a character truly thinks or believes. Now, in this situation, we see how Lady Macbeth wants Macbeth to be king and wants to take action into her own hands in order to ensure that Macbeth gets king. Now, what does she suggest? Well, of course, the murder of King Duncan when he comes to visit at nighttime. Macbeth, of course, being completely caught off guard here, does not necessarily like this idea. He's a little open to it, but we see a lot of his hesitation. But the second he begins to hesitate, Lady Macbeth begins to challenge his manhood. A very effective tool is saying, hey, you're not willing to do this to have power? What kind of man are you really? She encourages Macbeth in a very important and significant quote. She says, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. I mean, right here we get the theme of appearance versus reality. We also get this metaphor of looking like an innocent flower, so looking kind to people as they're presented to you, such as looking nice to King Duncan. Hey, King Duncan's going to come to our home, we're going to show him the works, the dinner's going to be beautiful, we're going to be very polite and kind to him. But deep down, you and I, Macbeth, we know what we're going to do. We're going to kill King Duncan because he's not even going to anticipate that we're going to do anything. We're going to act like the serpent, the snake, underneath it all. So the theme of appearance versus reality comes into play here because Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are going to present themselves. They're going to appear one way and be kind to King Duncan. But in reality, their plan is to murder and for Macbeth to become king. Now, this becomes a huge kind of fundamental component of our play because after the murder of King Duncan, what will Lady Macbeth and Macbeth's response be? Keep in mind, it's going to be very different. But Lady Macbeth ultimately plants the dagger in King Duncan's room. She orchestrates this murder. And even when Macbeth second guesses this entire plan, she continuously challenges his manhood and encourages him to do it. She connects this whole idea of gaining power almost as a sexual urge that is inside of her that she cannot have unless he becomes king. Now, I really hope you found this video to be especially important. Keep in mind, at the end of this video, when you hear or at the end of the scene, when you hear those bells ring, that's going to be that's going to be an important element as well. Think about the change that has just happened to Macbeth. We're going to see character development firsthand. I hope you all have a fantastic day and an even better weekend. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again shortly.